My name is Hendy.
My name is Roman Bruno Rivera.
My name is Angela Clark.
My name is Elizabeth Bowen.
We are representing the Chicago Ridge Library. We are interviewing John Zelis on Monday, May 1st, 2017 at the Chicago Ridge Public Library. This interview is being conducted as part of the Project Next Generation grant for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and the Illinois Veteran History Project. Funding for the Project Next Generation grant was awarded by the Illinois State Library, a department of the Office of Secretary of State, using funds provided by the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services under the provisions of the Library Services and Technology Act, LSTA.
Can you please provide your full name?
Okay, can I get my notes?
Yes.
And get comfortable? All right. My full name is John Joseph Zelis.
What is your date of birth?
Date of birth is October 27, 1946,
Where were you born?
in Chicago.
Who were your parents?
Well, my parents were John Zelis Sr. and Loretta Zelis.
What were their occupations?
They were factory workers.
What school and college did you attend?
Okay. You wanted to know which school and college I attended? Okay, we're skipping over some. All right. Let's see, the schools and colleges. I developed a passion for electronics in grade school. So in grade school, I don't know, 6th or 7th grade, I used to work with the junk man when I was about your age. And I used to go out and we used to collect junk, little junky radios and stuff and TVs. Now you have to understand, back in that time, it was a common thing for people to go ahead and do that. Some had a trade like that. And that was a time when we had vacuum tubes. And we didn't have, they didn't have transistors and they didn't have computers. It didn't exist at that time. And sometimes the only way that you could learn is on your own through going to the library or in the school by teachers that had that offered you their talents, and that's what happened usually through that period. I learned about electricity and the tube electronics, but it was slowly transferring into transistors. Transistor was a big deal back then. It was just being developed.
Did you work before joining the service? If so, what job did you have?
What was the question? I can't hear you.
Did you work before joining the service? If so, what job did you have?
Before the Army, that was, let's say, after high school, about 1964. Yeah, about 1964. It was a difficult time for me because I really didn't have a lot of money to go to college. I had to think about going to work and getting a job, and also going to school at the same time, right? Okay.
What year did you enter the service?
what year I entered the service. 1968.
How old were you when you started serving?
I was about 22, 23 years old when I first went into the Army.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted, but I have a few thoughts about that. Okay. When I was, or in that timeline, I received a notification that I was 1A. The kids today have to understand that there was a draft besides and having the capability to enlist. And there's a big difference when you have a pressure. When you're drafted, you might go and get a job that you really don't want to do. You might work with people you don't want to work with, and you're going to do a job that you don't want to do. And that would be a difficult time to go into war at that time. But I chose to enlist because in this democracy that we have right now, which is a pretty cool idea, I got to choose the military and I got to choose a vocation. And these two, that kind of a concept is what made me join. Plus, I got to build my skill in electronics. I enjoyed electronic technology, and I said to myself, well, gee, if you want to do that, go ahead and have the Army train me. And it was one of the best decisions I made, as long as I got out of it okay. Because there's always in your mind the lingering idea that you can be killed. You can be injured, terribly injured. And these are some of the things that you have to sift through and think about when you're doing it or making that decision.
How many years were you entitled, signed up to serve?
3.
How long did you actually serve?
3.
What branch of service did you serve with?
Army.
Why did you choose that specific branch? Did you have a reason for joining that particular branch?
Yeah, reflecting on what I just said, I chose the Army because it was a land-based kind of a military action. I didn't want to fly because I didn't want to fall out of the sky. If an airplane got hit or something, they would crash. I didn't want to go that way. And the same thing with the Navy. I didn't want to drown. If you were in the Navy and you were on a ship of some kind, it seemed a little bit more difficult. So I chose the Army. Maybe I would have a better chance of surviving if something did happen to me. But as you can see, fortunately, I made it out okay.
What was the highest rank that you held?
E5. It's like a sergeant, only they call it a specialist. I was a specialist in electronics.
How did it feel when you started your service experience? Was it scary?
Yes, it was. I was scared, very scared. It was one of those kinds of situations where you don't know what's going to happen, and it's very disciplined. There are you have a responsibility in a sense. I considered myself a patriot, meaning did I want to go? No. Should I go? Yes. Should I have to go? In a way, because that's my responsibility as a citizen. And as I pointed out before, the draft, the difference between a draft and the difference between enlisting, you have a chance to determine your destiny at least a little bit, even though it's a difficult choice, especially in a war like that.
How did you adapt to military life?
It took a while. It took a while to adjust to the personalities, to the people that were there. This is a situation, or it's a culture that's very serious. You're giving your life, and they're giving their life. You're dealing with men who are trying to lead you, but they want to depend on you. You've got to do your job. You've got to understand how to take instructions. You've got to have a responsibility. You've got to have ethics. It goes back to the very old ancient, if you ever thought about Aristotle and Socrates and Plato and all those people, they had three fundamentals. It was called ethos, logos, and pathos. Do you remember that? If you had it in your classes, it's ethics, logic, and the path that you take. And it's so very important that you understand those things, and they drill it into you. And they teach you how to think, or how the enemy thinks, and they teach you how you should react to it. And in other words, if you don't have to kill anyone, you don't. Don't be a murderer. You take a prisoner, and things like that.
Where did you attend basic training? Where were you stationed?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. It's in the Ozarks, Missouri Ozarks. It's a very nice place if you're not in the Army. It's difficult. It's sort of like really tough, like Cub Scout or Boy Scout camping. Really difficult. I mean, you know what a bivouac is. A bivouac is sort of like camping out, eating out in the rain, digging foxholes and marching, forced marches, with your weapons, with ponchos, and it's raining out, or in when it's not raining out, when it's really nice and hot, doing a 20-mile forced march, or running with your weapon, things like that. It was difficult for me. I wasn't a real athletic person at the time, and actually I had a physical problem I developed when I was in basic training. I developed foot fractures, and I had to go through a recovery process. But eventually I passed the physical. It took some time, but sometimes there's things that they don't tell you about basic training. There were people who had heart attacks. There were people who went crazy. They committed suicide. And there were other people like me, in a sense, that had physical disabilities that had to be trained a little bit longer. And that was those kinds of situations, sometimes they're not talked about. And those things should be. And extending it a little bit further, I have a deep concern about those persons that are veterans from a war like Vietnam, and they commit suicide for some kind of a reason. They call it post-traumatic stress. Far too many every day do it. They should try to think about how to play this out in the world and how to play life out rather than give up. And that's another part of the reason why I want to write a book about that. And in that book, I'm going to try to express some ideas to help solve that problem.
How long did you have to train per day?
All day, every day, 7 days a week. It was endless. Get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and start the duty. Be on time. Anybody who wasn't on time was considered AWOL, absent without leave. That's what AWOL stands for. You have to be on time. You have to be punctual, and if you're not there on time, you're going to be penalized for it.
What was basic training like?
Very rigorous, very physical. Every day they had what was called PT, physical training. It meant that you would be you'd start out with getting up in the morning and going to, your chow and your breakfast, and then you would go to a formation, and then they march you out to a field. In the field, everybody would spread out, and there would be one instructor who would start to dictate what the exercise is for the moment. And they'd actually make you do it, and if you didn't do it, you'd have to do it over again and over again until you got it. And this is what created a lot of soreness in a lot of young men, including myself, but it made me a lot stronger, it made me a better person, and it made me to understand what discipline is and responsibility. I just played it out and I stuck it out as best I could, rather than being the type of a person that said they would call up their girlfriends or their moms or their dads and they say, "Get me out of here, I can't take it." A lot of guys were doing that. They couldn't take it. And a lot of them they left because they couldn't take the physical training, and they couldn't take the, let's say, hazing. In college and the university system, they have a term called hazing, and it's being harassed by another person. It's a carryover from the Europeans, where you're subservient to another person. You have to serve another person in certain ways, and sometimes their attitudes were such that you really didn't like to do what they wanted you to do, but you try to do it anyway, and you try to help them when they give you an order, because sometimes the order was something that you couldn't do, and you try to do it, and after a while they do understand you can't do it.
What were the living conditions like?
Reasonable. We had what was called barracks. If we're looking at basic training, was barracks. This is like a place that has about it can contain about 40 men with bunk beds and things like that. We all had to sleep together. You have a big shower. You all shower together. And we all have to keep it clean. Those that didn't pull their weight were chastised even by the people that they had to live with. You had to pull your weight, and you had to do specific duties like cleaning up all the cigarette butts. They call it police call, cleaning. Kitchen police, KP. You had to go and serve. People do it here to serve meals, and there they call it kitchen police, where they help the cooks cook. But it was okay. In a way, it was enough to get by.
Could you call and talk to your family during basic training?
Yes, yeah.
What was the food like?
It ranged from good to terrible. It depends on what you liked, and it depends on how they cooked it. There were some times when breakfast was outstanding, and lunch could have been a little bit better, and dinner was okay, but then sometimes it wasn't. It was some people had what do you call it when you eat something that's disagreeable. I forgot what the term is. When you eat something, you break out in a rash, or you throw it up. You can't eat it. Some people reacted to the food that way, but that was all of a sudden, it was kind of a discovery. We find out they didn't know. A lot of people didn't know that went into the Army. They didn't know that they had some kind of a allergy to that food. That's what I was looking for, an allergy to food or whatever it was that they were feeding you.
Were you able to have a social life? What types of things did you do for fun?
Yes. In basic training, they had an orderly room, they call it. An orderly room that would get disorderly a lot of times. In the room, they had things like foosball, pool, and different kinds of games that you could play, card games, checkers, and things like that. I used to like to play shoot pool. I used to play foosball. There were a couple other kind of video games. I don't know. I didn't want video games back then. Just card games, maybe. Checkers, chess. There were a few people who had the capability to play chess.
Where were you stationed after basic training?
After basic training, you went to advanced, they call it AIT, Advanced Individual Training. And this was in New Jersey, in a signal school. I went to a signal school to be trained as an electronic technician in what they call fixed plant carrier repair. It was a broadband kind of technique in communications. I got pretty good at it. In fact, they held me over to be an instructor for almost a year, I believe, before I went to Vietnam.
Are your living conditions different than basic training?
Yes, a lot different. Yes, as in advanced in this school, the difference was a two-man room. I had a roommate at that time. Okay, he had a bed, I had a bed, and we shared. Sometimes I would never see my roommate, and sometimes we were, seeing a lot of each other, and it was that way, according to schedule. We all had duties to perform even after we had to do our regular work and school.
Was the food different at your new base?
A little bit. Yeah, I would say it was a little bit better. The advanced training was a lot better.
Do you have any basic training stories you would like to share?
Basic training stories. Well, the one story that I'm going to try to commit to a book. It has to do with me volunteering for a medical kind of service. I volunteered to have an operation on my right foot. That's right here. Actually, what they did is they found out that my toes were growing crooked on the outside, and what the doctors wanted to do was to just turn one of the toes a little bit, about 45 degrees, and that was it. They didn't have to. They just said they wanted to. And they says, can we do it? And I says, oh, sure, why not? I was 23 years old. I was, healthy, okay with that. And I wasn't sure who did it. They had a big screen in front of me. I couldn't see anything. There was just the big bright lights on the other side. It's sort of like one of those stories about being abducted by aliens. There were people on the other side operating, and I had a local anesthetic, and I could feel them going in, doing the operation, and turning the bone, and putting it all back together. And it was done to help train doctors or surgeons at the time. And I said, great, I'm helping them. Maybe they'll help me someday. However, there is a downside to this. Later on in time, I'm going to move forward in time. In my last job, I worked for the railroad, and in the railroad, I had an accident or an injury, and in this injury, I slipped and I sprained my ankle, and the medical doctor found out that in that area, I mean, she was pretty good. This was a young Italian doctor. She identified a point. She pinpointed exactly where I had post-op. She said, she called it, you might have chronic arthritis at that point. Okay, think about that. Exactly where those guys operated, I have chronic arthritis now in my old age. Now, I'm not complaining. What I'm trying to say is that's something that I'd like you to understand, that some men have gone through. In other words, if they volunteer for something to do good, they have to understand that caveat or that warning that something can happen in the future. I didn't know, but at least I'd like to get credit for that. And it's not anywhere on my documentation. And actually, I remember it. And this is a wonderful opportunity to tell my story about it. Not only here, but in a book. I'd like to write a book and tell my story about it so everyone can understand that how we try to do something in a war or in the military, it might turn in a different way. And so those people understand, or everyone understands. You people are what we can say, the French call it the avant-garde. You're the front line of our future. You're the front line. I might have been in the front line in this war, but you're on the front line for our future. And I am proud that you are here, letting me tell my story.
When you finished basic training, what position did you hold?
It was E5. I was a specialist. I was returning from Vietnam. I used to work in what was called Old Vuong Chow, old control. And this was way up on the mountains, like Moses, up in the clouds. Vietnam is a beautiful country. And it's sort of, at the time I went there in 1968, it would seem sort of backwards. There were a lot of water buffalo doing all the heavy work for the farmers in the rice paddies and things like that.
What kind of things did you do having that position?
Would you say that again?
What kind of things did you do having that position?
My job was in operations. If you've ever seen a picture of those trailers, it's a big trailer, or there were several of them. They put them together sometimes and they create a building. But in this particular trailer, it was by itself. As an example, the air conditioning went out on this one, and I tried like the devil to fix it because I didn't want to work in it. It was at least 100 degrees, it seemed like it, and it was so hot. And it's difficult to work in electronics when you're, any kind of a job, when you're sweating and it's horrible hot outside. It was a control room with a lot of equipment. It can talk to different kinds of people that were in the front lines that had to have logistical support. Airplanes, or our Air Force also, and the Navy also, they could shoot from offshore onto the land. They could drop things from the sky. So you had these kinds of military support, and helicopters, of course. all that was support, and it all came through communications, which was in microwave, troposcatter, cable, radio. It all had to be operated and controlled and adjusted for the time.
Did you receive any specialized training for that position? Do you feel that you received enough training?
There could have been more. But they put a lot, and they compact a lot of training in a short amount of time. And one of the really, really interesting things is to be able to have a great deal of different kinds of equipment that you're working with. It's an experience that is hard to get anywhere in industry. If you're going to go to work for one company, they're going to have a few things. But oh my goodness, the Army has just an incredible array of, or any of the military installations, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, they all have an incredible amount of different sorts of equipment and things that they need right now to do to work, to work in combat.
What were the rules in the military?
Oh, the code of conduct. There's about 6 of them. Okay, if I ran through them real quickly, one in particular, you understand that we are a military person, and if we get caught, we give them our name, our serial number, and that's it. And we expect to be treated fairly. And also, another part too, on the reverse end, if there are prisoners of war, you treat them fairly. In other words, in that kind of code of conduct, no, you don't abuse them, and you treat them fairly. And there's several others that I have a difficult time right now of remembering what they are. Maybe I have it over here. Take a moment out. Did I remember some of them? No, I forgot them. I wrote this so many times, so I remember it. But then I forgot that one. In other words, the last one I could remember is if you get caught and you're a POW, the rule is you try to sneak away. So that's it. You just don't surrender yourself. You try to fight as best you can to get out. And that's probably the last code.
Did you serve in any wars?
Just that one, Vietnam, that campaign. The whole Vietnam situation was a war.
Where were you stationed during wartime?
This was called Quy Nhon, Vietnam, which was, they had several sections, and from what I understand, this was called the Second Corps, 2 Corps. And it's a little bit north of, or a lot north than Saigon. Saigon is at the bottom of Vietnam, and then there's other little towns that Da Nang, and then Quy Nhon. Quy Nhon is a little bit farther north.
Were you in the front lines or back lines?
Sort of in the middle. If you want to think about it in the sense of, no, I wasn't on the front lines, but I helped support the front lines. In other words, whatever they needed, you call the back lines. You make sure that they get the message. And the people in the front, if they need help, they better get it. And so it was important for the communications. I think I was called Bravo 26. Bravo 26 at the time.
Did you wear any protective gear?
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Flak jackets, armor, different kinds of gloves at the time, but the flak jacket was important, or bulletproof vest.
What job did you have during wartime?
As a communication specialist, going back to that, right? I explained that.
What were your living conditions like during wartime? Did you sleep in tents on the ground and sleeping bags?
During the wartime, we had what was called a Quonset Hut. A Quonset Hut is one of those round kind of tin cans. It's sort of like a tin can hut, cut in half, huge, gigantic Quonset Huts. Half a dozen guys could fit in it, in bunk beds. We all had a foot locker, and we kept all our personal things in a foot locker, including medication. Things like, I wasn't rare to have a bottle of Jim Beam and to take the edge off. And a lot of guys needed it because there were a couple of times when we were attacked by rockets. The enemy would send a rocket in. You don't know who's going to get hit at any time. It's a matter of luck.
How was the food during wartime? Did you eat local foods?
No. I wouldn't want to risk it.
Can you explain what your surroundings were like? Can you describe the scenery?
The what? Scenery? The scenery is beautiful. The country is beautiful. And actually the people are beautiful. The only problem I think that they had was the political mind. But in a sense, it was a little bit more backward than, let's say, the way we live today. I'm sure that maybe it's a lot more modern today than, that's what, 50 years ago? A lot could have changed since then, but it was pretty backwards. They didn't have the television and radio that we have. They didn't have it. They didn't have the telephones. Not even the landline telephone. Do you remember a telephone when you picked it up? Do you hear the dial tone? Do you remember that? Long time ago. They don't have it anymore. But they didn't even have that. They didn't even have TV when we had TV. Like, you know, every day you could turn on your radio. Very, very rare.
What was the weather like where you were stationed?
Hot. Very hot. It was, in some cases, it was terrible. The wind, when there were storms, the wind was really difficult, and the rain was really difficult. When they had a cyclone, sometimes you had to be tied up to a rope so you won't blow away.
How did you feel while you were serving overseas?
How did I feel?
While you were serving overseas.
It depended. When I first got in, I was really, really scared. When I first got into country, I didn't know what to expect, and actually nobody knew what to expect when you go there. Anything could happen at any time, but after a while, you begin to calm down and you begin to understand that things might be, the stress that you feel turns into a norm.
Were you given any shots, vaccines to protect you from diseases, animals, or bug bites?
Yes, a lot, yes. So much so they shot you in one arm, then when you were sore they shot you on the other arm. All kinds.
How did you stay in contact with family and friends back home during wartime?
By mail.
Were you able to travel around when you had downtime? Did you get to see any sights?
I had the opportunity, but I didn't want to take it. It was volatile. I wouldn't want to go in town. Some guys did. Some guys would find trouble. Trouble would find them. I didn't want to do that, so I avoided it. But there is one thing that they have, which is really unusual. What I found out is they have a rest and relaxation period called R&R. And for guys like me, we could go ahead and take leave. You get a pass, you get a leave, a small leave. It might be only a week or two. And I went to Bangkok, Thailand. And I just got a little place with a lot of food, a nice swimming pool, and I enjoyed myself. Besides going out to the discos. Well, I was only 24 years old, 25, come on, and single. So I had my fun, and and that's my rest and relaxation, and then went back to war.
Was there anything that stood out about the culture or countryside?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Like, was the culture like the same as ours now? Or no?
Somewhat. I think, yes, it is. In a lot of senses, it's abused. I'm saying that laughingly. Their culture is different. They have a different politics. It's a war that many say we didn't win, and the reason why we didn't win, it's because of the politics and the poor leadership in politics. As an example, now I think they claim Vietnam is communist. It's not a democracy.
Were there a lot of bugs? Did you have bug repellent or nets to protect you?
Yeah, bugs. I hate bugs. We had all kinds of bugs. Critters and crazy critters and all kinds of things like that. You had repellent and things to repel, yeah. Lotions.
How did you deal with the different languages and culture? Were you given any training or phrases to help you communicate with the local people?
Yes, they told us, in a way, they told us the political characteristics of the country. Not to criticize them, or not to it wasn't only to criticize them, but to shame them or ridicule them and things like that. It's to respect them. Okay, it was try to maintain a respectful kind of a way, because there were some men who weren't respectful, and that created a lot of polarity, or a lot of bias, and a lot of hatred and bias.
Did any of the local citizens work on base where you were stationed?
Yes. In other words, some local citizens were hired as subcontractors. And subcontracting means that they would do some of the odd jobs that we didn't have to do. In other words, if I had to go in and maintain communications for the combat situation, I had somebody to help me do my laundry. They had a house girl, they call her, or a house guy or house boy, or a person that would come in and, take care of your garbage and stuff, and you wouldn't have to do all that kind of cleaning. But this is common in the Army. So you spend your time out there working as a soldier and not messing around with a bag of garbage. So this is why they did it that way, or why they do it now that way.
Do you have any stories you would like to share?
Some, but I think that they're not appropriate for the time right now.
How did you adapt to the scenery?
How did I adapt to what?
How did you adapt to the currency?
Currency? Oh, yeah, that's a good question. There was a strange thing that I didn't understand at first, but they didn't pay you with money. You got paid like with Monopoly money. Yeah, it was funny money. It had pretty colors on it, and it looked strange. Did you ever play Monopoly? And you saw the kind of money that you had? That's what it was. It called military payment certificates. It was written right on the money. And I think they had dollar bills, 5s and 10s and 20s. And you had that kind of a money. They didn't have a greenback then. Not like in Iraq and Iran. I think they had real money. I think it was real money. I've heard stories that they used to ship $100 bills on skids over there. Maybe that's how we lost so much money. I don't know. But but anyway, in Vietnam, they had this thing called MPC, Military Payment Certificates. And the military payment certificates would give you the capability to go and buy things in the PX. I can go buy a nice bottle of Pain and War wine if I wanted to. Or I could get a carton of cigarettes. Or I could buy potato chips, beer, or whatever. That was one of the advantages. A lot of beef jerky, because you could use that to avoid the mess hall.
How did you return home?
By regular airplane, American Airlines. It was regular commercial airlines. That's how I got there too.
Who greeted you when you returned home?
Well, my family.
How did you readjust to civilian life after serving?
In some ways, it wasn't easy. It was knowing I had to go out and get a job eventually because I had to work. I was a poor boy. I still am. I was a little jumpy around 4th of July. My first 4th of July at home, all this popping and fireworks that people take for granted, it bothered me. I would stay in. I just had this funny kind of a feeling when you're over there and you hear that, you've got to dive and duck. It just carries over for about a year, at least a year or two. I couldn't handle that part. I was jumpy until it faded after a couple of years, and it didn't bother me.
Did you return to the job you left when you were discharged?
No, didn't want to.
Did any of your siblings serve in the military?
No.
Can you recall your instructors?
I remember how they were, but I don't remember their names. They were let's say they were disciplined. They had to be. They had to be tough. The whole idea was to toughen everybody up. But as I said before, some people could take it, some people couldn't. And that's what the Army is there for, to weave through that, sift through that, if you will, and that's how you get the best of the best. The military training and that physical kind of training, sometimes it's tougher and harder than a lot of athletic training. They make you do things that are really crazy.
What did your uniforms look like, and were they comfortable?
They were comfortable. Actually, you had what was called the fatigues, OD green. They were just pants, like cargo pants that we have today in Dockers, cargo pants. The same thing. You have big pockets in them. You could put good stuff in. And shirts are the same way. You had, it was like Levi's shirts, Levi pants. They wear a long time. But then you had dress uniforms, like khakis and Class A's. Class A's were smart. They were like a suit, real spiffy and real dressed up. You had a suit, a tie, and a shirt, and what they call low quarters, a regular shoe, and black socks. And it was a pretty sharp outfit that you got. It was sort of dark green. The Air Force had blues, navy blue, a darker blue. The Air Force was a lighter blue, and like that.
Were there different uniforms for different events?
Yes, yeah. They had different decorations, I was going to say. Patches. When you see a military person, you'll see patches over here. By their heart, those are little identifications of where they were, what they did. In similar sense as a scout might have different patches that identify the things that they do. The merits. They get merit patches. You've accomplished something. You've done something, and you have a patch. It shows that you have responsibility. You have integrity, and you were doing something good for society.
What gear were you provided for different weather conditions? Were you given coats or long underwear if it was cold?
Oh yeah. Yes, you get a good coat. You'd get one of the neatest things was it was a general coat that everybody would get, and it would keep you warm. It was a real nice coat. As a matter of fact, they wanted you to give it up when you left the Army, and a lot of people didn't want to give it up. They kept their coats, and they snuck them out. How much time do we have left? Are we over?
You can keep going.
Oh, we're all done?
No, but
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
If your boots wore out, were you able to get new ones?
Yes. There's a difference in jungle boots and regular military boots, so there was a trade-off. When we trained, you had regular boots, and then when you went into the jungle, you got jungle boots. Then when you came back, you get your regular boots.
Did you carry a contain of water? What did you do if you ran out of water?
You get dehydrated. You try not to run out of water. You use common sense to try to ration your water.
How did you get paid? Did you get paid each week?
By the month. When you're in combat, it's sort of like take the money and stash it in the company safe, wherever it was. The company commander would take care of that. And then after you're done with your tour, you just collect it all, and they change it into dollars, and you take it home with you. So when you're in country and you don't have to pay taxes, it's a nice little chunk of money when you come home.
Were you able to spend the money off base, or did you send it home?
I send a lot home to Mom.
Was the money you got paid enough to live on?
Yeah, that's about it for me only. It was not enough to bring a family up, no.
Did you encounter any families, wild or domestic?
Animals? Yes, wild boar, water buffalo, and other kind of varmints that we get to shoot.
Did you have a pet? Can you describe how it looked?
We had a dog. It was just like a brown dog, regular. It was a nice dog. He would follow us around all the way to the chow hall. Because well, I had a friend that I can remember. His name was Bruce. He loved to eat. He didn't care what it was. Come on, Zelis, let's go eat. And he'd always give the dog some food after we're done. He'd sneak some food out and give it to the dog. So the dog became our friend, a real good friend of us.
Where were you when the war ended?
When the war ended, about 1973, let's say, I could barely remember. They were building the Sears Tower then. Yeah, in Chicago. I was a communication craftsman for AT&T. I worked in one of those real big tall buildings downtown. They call it Chicago 2. My military experience got me that good job. It was in, let's see, I can remember the address. It was 85 West Congress Parkway. What did I do over there? Same thing, communications and broadband. I was a multiplex specialist and maintaining communication, long distance telephone, and private line.
Do you have any personal reflections that you would like to add?
Yes. Does this cover the message that I would like to leave for future generations, or is it the same thing, or is this the end? Because you're jumping to the last one.
Towards the end, she's saying something different.
How would you?
We'll just come back.
Oh, okay. Is there something that I would? How is this going to go? What was that question again?
Do you have any personal reflections that you would like to add?
Personal reflections. Okay. Yes, I wanted to give you all a thank you to be able to express my story and my personal experience. And you know, in some cases, a person coming back from a war, they go through their own odyssey. I don't know if you've ever heard of Homer's Odyssey or studied that kind of humanities. And you're a patriot, and I stand by the Constitution. It's important, especially the First Amendment. You should know it, all those different kinds of ideas that are in it. And especially for this, for our new social experience, the internet. You see, I see what it is without the internet and see what it is with the internet. And I'm experiencing that kind of a spectrum. And this is what I want to put in a book about the military experience that I had coupled with my medical issues, and hopefully young men and women like yourselves would pause and think about those elements of war, but also think about peace. Why just think about war? Think about peace. And why not, go through some of questions. Does anyone think about peace in this thing? Because war is loaded with a lot of brutality. And they say, there's kind of a saying, it really tests you for the person that you are when you're in war. But it also tests you for the person that you are not, sometimes.
Did you receive any medals?
Just the Medal of Merit. I wasn't that ambitious to be a hero.
Did you marry before or after you served?
After. That was important. That's an important point. I didn't want to make a commitment. I was going steady, if you will. I had a girlfriend. I didn't want to make a commitment with her. I'm going to war. I don't know if I'm coming back. She wanted to get married. I didn't want to. So maybe I was lucky. She went off and she got married. She couldn't wait.
Did you have any friends when you were serving? Did you keep in contact with any veterans who served while you did?
I had some friends, but I never kept in contact with them.
Do you have any photos or objects still as memories?
I think I have a duffel bag that I can stuff things in and carry it around. That's the only thing. It was kind of a good utility bag. Other than that, I used to have pictures, but I lost them through a lot of moving and changing and stuff like that. Besides my discharge, I have an honorable discharge.
Are you a member of any veterans organizations? If so, which ones?
The VA hospital. It's one of the, it's one of the most important things I think a veteran could have, to be able to get medical care. If I could add a note to that, that kind of a care is important because of that one thing that I did look up and I found out more about. It's called Agent Orange. This is it's a funny name, Agent Orange. This is a defoliant that now they consider it a carcinogen, meaning that it's cancer forming or it's cancerous. And I looked it up, and I'll cut through a lot of paragraphs and information here to go to what conditions the VA recognizes about Agent Orange. Skin disorders, like resembling teenage acne. A person can get that. Skin disorders characterized by thinning and blistering. Acute nervous disorder. Type 2 diabetes. I didn't know that. Agent Orange, men from Vietnam also can get different kinds of diseases like prostate cancer, respiratory cancer, including lung diseases or bronchitis. The one that really seems important to me is spinal bifida, the birth defects among veterans and veteran children. That really is news to me. I didn't know that when I was going in. Agent Orange is not a good thing. And these guys, might get mental in some ways and have difficulties. And people should know it. This is what we have to deal with.
How do you think the military now compares to when you served?
I don't know.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who are you living in?
The message? A lot will be in my book. But you have to understand, and it includes some of my philosophies. Being a patriot is natural for me, okay? Because I'm born in the country. Anyone who's born in the country should feel like a patriot to that country. I mean, I love it. This is great. This is a great country. It's a beautiful country. And I support the American way and understanding, and also understanding the new age, especially with the internet. This is fantastic. However, the downside, the American politicians, the academics, journalists, reporters, novelists, clergy want to lead through this new time using the media. Exampled by our new president tweeting. This never happened before. Well, we never had it. But he's trying to make a difference. All right, yet all those politicians and academics and journalists and reporters and novelists and clergy also tweet. But it seems yet more often some tweet a lot of false tweets that aren't true. So this false conversation or this action done by many politicians is giving good reason of the age-old social cultures happening in our society, that a concept in conversation ignored by the media, meaning not giving accountability because of these pledges or promises not honored or fulfilled, that America now has a homegrown radicalism. This falls in that category of what they call outlawry or ex post facto. I'm going to explain that in my book. Outlawry is kind of that way when they put a poster, and this was done by George Bush. He says Osama bin Laden wanted dead or alive. He had no trial, or a lot of outlaws, or men who were considered outlaws are made to be outlaws. Pause and think about the improvements that are needed in the infrastructure, clean air, clean water, basic clean energy. One of my own personal messages is health care free for everyone. Quit messing around with this idea and do it. My current ambition is to write a novel about such topics, linking those issues, and that new laws or social norms need to be implemented to take intake of grievances rather than letting situations fester and resulting in damaging riots and street demonstrations. This would be nice. In other words, if we had intake like we have for Army enlistment, little stations that are in strip malls, instead of just taking the men into service, take some people, intake their grievance at that point. Pause and think about regulations versus quality control. When they say regulation, we're going to get rid of the regulations in business. I've worked in quality control as a quality control technician, quality assurance technician. You get rid of quality, you're getting rid of regulation, you get rid of quality. It means the environment is denigrated. The environment is poor. The implications, present and future. Clean air. Do you realize our air is composed of, let's say, 72% nitrogen and 21% oxygen, and the rest are little other kinds of gases. This air that we breathe, this air we use to see. If we can't, if it's distorted in some ways, we won't mature into the future like we are now. If we contaminate it, we wreck ourselves. So, my generation is called the Boomer Age. And I wanted to stop for a moment and talk about the 1950s as being important in technology and economics. Just a moment. And the way we're going through the internet, using and teaching computer-assisted instruction. Is it marvelous? You can learn things through the computer now in a way that we hadn't done it before in brick and mortar. And pause, to be grateful, but to beware of the social situations and observe for abuse. Especially, being a veteran gives the opportunities to help our social system work better, especially to ferret out and identify waste and corruption. This is one of the philosophies that I feel that I'm giving the opportunity to give feedback and to improve the justification for war and try to emphasize the peace and the philosophies for peace. Vietnam is a good example of how good intentions to spread democracy at war did not work. Because many analyze the politics in Vietnam today, Vietnam is still a communist form of government, a tyranny, a dictatorship. Yet veterans have been blamed and shamed for the vitiated, imperfect, and corrupt, poor political policies and profiteering done in this war, and Iraq and Afghanistan war, when all the facts point to political and incompetent leadership, and particular poor cover-up media reporting. Decisions and actions that are regretful, shameful, and scaled to criminal. Importantly, post-war issues about veterans that survive to retirement yet deal with mental or physical issues are ignored. Veterans should not have to advertise fundraising through commercials. Veterans should have the capability to enjoy, especially after retirement, enjoy their country, to be able to visit what they defended, and to look and enjoy every day. That's why that issue of post-war suicide, to me, is embarrassing, and I think it's not really covered enough in the media. And most of all, again, I'd like to send my appreciation to you and to the young man that's here, to hopefully he'll realize someday in the future, along with his dad, who helps him, appreciate that you have a father. When I was your age, I didn't have a dad. My father left the family when I was only about 6 years old. So I grew up without guidance, without anybody poking me one way or the other. He's trying to help you. Listen to him. He's a wealth of experience, and you should be proud of him.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
A ton of things. Do I have time to go over them? No, probably not. The last thing that I think it is the system, the Electoral College, and fake news that's going on in today's social environment. The Electoral College is something that I'm really not sure about, and fake news, this term really bothers. We've had fake news since the time of Christ. Jeez, now they're first coming out with it. This is characteristic, I mean, by mainstream media, and even the president himself is saying, that's fake news. Jeepers, when you go into the supermarket and you see those magazines that have, when I was a kid, they had the same kind of magazines with stories on you cannot believe. You know, and now they're just saying, well, the news is fake news. Well, we must have a fake economy, and we have fake jobs, too. And so our politicians are faking it. Pause for a moment and think about the so-called Electoral College. I looked it up. And I can't believe how loaded it is. It's with politicians who have to be elected that are in this electoral college. And sometimes I think maybe it would be more fair to have a citizen or two in this election process somehow. I don't know. It has to change, because I don't think it's fair. This is part of the genius of our forefathers, or they call it the so-called genius method. This go around, it's not working. I don't think it is. Because how can it, when you have somebody saying, or we have fake news, how can a society make terms for war and peace within a shifting, fractured, slippery bedrock of fake news, rules that change so much, making arbitrary declarations at will, can stress and derail a society any time? I mean, they have to cut it out, stop making things like that. These issues lead to my argument that there's abuse and violation of several legal principles at this time, not addressed by the media or our system, or recognized by a large part of the electorate. They have no clue. Many citizens don't understand what's going on. They're not faking news, they're steering behavior. And in conclusion, thank you.
We'd like to thank you for serving, and thank you for coming today and share your story with and the many people that will see it in the future.
I hope you're right. Thank you.